Welcome, everybody. My name is Ana Silva. I'm the founder of the brand Scientific Writing Vault, dedicated to specialized training in scientific communication and writing. I'm a professional researcher in biological sciences since 2008, and I'm the first author of several papers in my field, a very experienced trainer on scientific writing and communication with over 5,000 participants and 50 training events. And I'm currently a senior researcher at a public university in Portugal. This video is part of a series that is created in collaboration with Protocol Labs. And this series is dedicated to enlighten and facilitate the uptake of straight-to-action knowledge on scientific communication and writing. And today is the first of that series, and it aims to disentangle the common aspects or the common structures of scientific publications of scientific papers. And this training is given in the context of computer sciences. However, it is applicable no matter what the field, to every field, any area of research is compatible with the contents of this series. Okay. Also, any level of research experience or even writing experience is compatible because we're going to be covering from the basic foundations of scientific writing to some detailed solutions that will boost you up in terms of gaining independency in scientific writing and targeting the right audience and preparing the manuscript according to what the journals and the editors want. So my goal is to promote your independency in scientific communication in all its aspects. I do hope that you enjoyed this series, and I invite you now to join me on today's focus, the structure of a scientific publication, how to optimize it, and what tools can you use to facilitate the writing process. So as for our participants, again, feel free to intervene anytime as much as you wish. So today we're going to be talking about papers mainly, because papers, scientific publications, they are one of the main metrics to evaluate a research career and its progress and its merit. So the number of publications you have, in what journals were they published, and how many times they were cited are three of the main metrics used currently to evaluate the, let's say, the part of the worth of a CV of a researcher. So they're quite important to add some of these lines into your CV if you want to pursue any type of job opportunity within the academia or related to any research company like Protocol Labs. Okay, so that's what we're going to be covering today. What are the structures of these scientific publications? And we are in the context of publishing them in journals, in conference proceedings, and in any, let's say, endpoint that has peer review process. So if your manuscripts will go through a peer review process and are published in a journal or in a conference proceeding, then it's considered as a valid research and validated research contribution to your scientific field. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about how to structure, what are the structures of these scientific publications, and what do they contain, how can we optimize their organization and their contents, and again, cover some of the tools you can use to facilitate the process. So the most common structure for any scientific paper is the IMDRaD structure. And the acronym is very simple. It corresponds to introduction, methods, results, and discussion. So no matter what the research field, the vast majority of journals follow very closely to this four main section structure. And it's not something that you will not have it. You will see differences and options, but the contents that those different options might have correspond exactly to what I'm going to be giving you in the next few slides. So hopefully this will be useful no matter what your reality. And I would like to first of all, to introduce you to what is this structure. This structure is a formal sequence of sections that the scientific community consider the ideal format to deliver what is expected from research communication, from research information. So normally the journals and the conference proceedings do not allow us to choose which sections to include. It is imposed upon us, and we can find the rules for that format. So each journal and each conference will have its own guidelines on how they wish the paper to be organized. And you should check those guidelines for authors or instructions for authors in the journal or the conference webpage, and get familiarized with exactly what is the structure that they wish to have for their publications. However, all of them will have something very similar to this, and I'm going to cover in the next few slides some differences that commonly appear as well. So to try to enlighten you what they are and what they mean in relation to this common structure. A paper has necessarily a title, and the title it really depends a lot on whose target audience, and normally titles are more relaxed, they're made more catchy in the context of a conference publication in relation to perhaps a journal publication, in the sense that in conferences we're trying to grab the audience attention, we're trying to bring them to our talk, to our session, and therefore sometimes we get a bit more relaxed and use titles that are more teasing, so we can invite people on board more easily. And the title and the abstract are like the visiting card of a publication, in the sense that in the vast majority of cases, that's what the reader has free access to. So by implying this, what I'd like to alert to you when you are preparing your own scientific publications is that the title and the abstract will be the first line of attack that you have to persuade the reader to go through your paper, to cite you eventually, and to get him or her on board. Because those are the things that the vast majority of readers actually go through to make the initial decision, should I bother reading the rest of the paper or not? So it's one of my first, let's say, advices will be spend quite a reasonable amount of time in getting the title and the abstract with content and type of information presented in a way that will be interesting, first of all, for your target audience. And I'm implying here as well that choosing or being aware of the characteristics of your target audience is extremely important, because it's very different to write to a journal of a very specialized field. So imagine the Journal of Cryptography, or for a more generalistic journal, something like Journal of Computer Sciences. One is much more specialized and the other one is much more generalistic. So the expectations from the target audience will be different, and we have to adjust the way we build the manuscript according to those expectations and to the different levels of background knowledge on the topic of our research. So in the title and the abstract, that's extremely important to match very carefully what are the contents with what we expect the target audience, first of all, to know about their background knowledge, and also where are an element that shows also in the first page. These are three main elements that show the first page, and they correspond mainly to alternative words. I'm going to give you some guidelines on them. They correspond to alternative words in relation to the title. So they're like a secondary level of information. Then we have the keywords that basically correspond to options of different vocabulary in relation to the title. Normally there are synonyms of the key items that we placed and we chose to include in the title. These are additional clues that the reader can use either to find your manuscript or to make a decision if it's interesting for him or her. The keywords are followed by the introduction, and this is the first main section where we're going to have to position our research, our particular research that we're presenting here. We're going to have to talk about why is it important in the current state of the art. So it's all about positioning. It's followed by the methods, where, as the name implies, we're going to give the protocols, the details of all the decisions we made in terms of data collection and data analysis, followed then by one of the most important sections as well, the results. And the results are to be perceived from the writing point of view as the sufficient evidence that we can put forward in a manuscript to support the arguments we're going to be making in the next section, the discussion. And so in the discussion is where we pick up on the evidence of the previous section, we digest it, we interpret that new piece of evidence, we explain how the system we're studying should change, our understanding of that system, how should it change based on the new evidence that we produced. The conclusion can be found either as part of the discussion, normally the last chapter of the discussion, or as a separate final section. And the conclusion should be dedicated to two main pieces of information: the impacts of what you found and what should be the future steps. So, and by impacts, I'm implying what are the consequences, what should change in the way of people doing things when they are approaching researching the system that you just found new evidence on. The acknowledgements to credit is due, either institutions or people or data providers, pretty much anyone or entity, or even the funding agencies or the funding project, they belong here. There's criteria to decide who should be in the author list and who should be in the acknowledgements. We're not going to be covering that here today, but suffice to say that the acknowledgements are all those that did not make an intellectual contribution either to the research design, its deployment, or writing the manuscript itself. The references. Normally we have a limit for those. They are given by the journal guidelines, and the rationale is that we should mainly be using, except in the context of a thesis, like a master or PhD thesis, we should only be using the most recent references, and normally not more than 2 references per claim. The idea is that you position and build up your arguments based on the latest evidence, the latest knowledge. So that's why it should be the most recent works. In the context of a thesis, the rationale is quite different. You're being evaluated for your capacity to do the literature review, and then it is expected that you do a more comprehensive list of references so that the jury can be reassured that you've done a thorough job and you have a full understanding of the topic of your thesis. So this is, in major strokes, the IMDRaD section. Okay, and one of my first warnings will definitely be this. You might not find exactly all of these names, all of these sections, and you should strive to check for the journal guidelines before you structure your manuscript. So before writing anything or opening the file, go to the target journal or the conference guidelines and find out what is the structure that they want to, because this can vary between journals and it should affect the way you set up the manuscript contents. We're going to talk about this a bit later. It's quite important for you to get the rules of the game, let's say, before you actually play it. So this is quite important. And why is it also important? Because these elements, these sections of the paper can actually vary in their naming. So the variations are not great, they're not many, and they're not really difficult to find equivalents, but I'm going to show you here some of the equivalences in terms of standard section names and what's commonly found as equivalents in the realm of computer science publications. Okay, so in standard journals, abstract is called abstract. In computer science, most of the time, abstract as well. Now, the introduction is slightly different, and this is the point where you might start recalling the papers you've been reading up until now, and you might realize that, oh, I've seen this before, or not really, I've seen something different. The vast majority of journals use the term introduction. In computer science, you can also find that section name, or something equivalent like our contributions plus related work. So the manuscript can have title, abstract, and then it's not followed by an introduction, it's followed by something called our contributions, and then there's subsection called related work. It's quite often also to see in computer science other equivalents of introduction that are called background plus research question. They're all equivalents, and in the sense of I'm going to be giving you later solutions on what information to be inserted in each of these sections. When I will be talking about introduction, I'm referring also to the same solution for our contributions, related work, background, and research questions, because in essence, those are the type of elements that should be contained inside an introduction. Simply in other fields like computer science, they're created with these titles instead of just an overall umbrella called introduction. The methods can be a little bit more variable, can be called methodology, can be called preliminaries, and it can go as far as in some computer science journals or proceedings, with self-explanatory headings. It's quite common because it really depends on what the research is, and sometimes it's easier to not have one method section with all the details inside, but to have several subdivided into self-explanatory headings. So it depends on what you've done and how you've done it. And from the reader's point of view, it's up to you within, of course, the rules of the journal to figure out if you go for self-explanatory headings. The rule is that you have to really choose correctly those titles of those headings, because they have to guide through the reader in terms of what is the type of information that you're giving, and is it still methods, is it now results, and what type of part of methods it is. So when you get under the situation where you can be creative in the section naming, then that's when you also have to be extremely careful from the reader's point of view to make sure that that heading will be really self-explanatory and what is going to be contained inside. The results in computer science really correspond to self-explanatory headings, and the same cautions apply. So there's room for a lot of, I'm not going to say personal organization, but optimized organization of contents with these explanatory headings, self-explanatory headings, but it comes with that cost. So really spend some time in getting them right. And what will advocate for you also is that before these self-explanatory headings, you present a very small paragraph introducing the reader to what to expect ahead. So you kind of provide the reader with a framework. This is the start of the results section, and this section is organized in this way. So you prepare the reader for those self-explanatory heading structure before they actually start reading them. The methods and the results really correspond to the essence and the body of the paper. So it's really here where you have to get things in the most reader-friendly way, because you have to realize that if you're not clear in how you've done things in the methodological section, then the reader, and of course I'm implying the journal editor and the reviewers, they might not, let's say, be persuaded that you collected data with good quality and quantity. Therefore, you have to aim here for detail and to provide reasons for your methodological choices. And because if there's something that creates doubt in your methods, in your procedure, then downstream from that, everything's going to be compromised. From the results onwards, the discussion, everything might actually be perceived differently from the reader's point of view. So in that regard, what you choose, the type of detail and your choices and the reasons supporting your choices and the methods will, let's say, validate or not the evidence that you decided to include in the results section. Okay, so it's quite important for these two main sections, and these two main parts of the body that compose the body of the paper, to be very clear, very detailed, and very well argued. The discussion and conclusion in, let's say, other fields, journals normally can be associated with a separate conclusion section or not. The conclusion is the final paragraph of the discussion. And in computer science, it can be called discussion, it can be called conclusion, or again, it might be self-explanatory headings. But again, no matter what you might find in the paper you're either reading or you're going to be submitting to, you're going to see that the types of information expected within those different namings, those equivalents, the information is exactly the same. So what I'm going to be giving you, let's say, as solutions for how to write an introduction, method, result, and discussion will have an immediate application to the variations in computer science or in any other field. Are you with me? Is this sounding at least sensible to you? And what is normally what you see in the journals that you read? Is it something very different from what I'm showcasing here?
I'm curious if you had to sort of assign a percentage to each of these columns under computer science equivalents. How common are the various naming conventions based on what you've encountered?
I'm going to say that I haven't really, it's hard to say because there's so many journals, but normally what I find is that there's the final column for introduction and discussion. Normally the most common ones are background plus research question and self-explanatory headings and methods and self-explanatory headings in the discussion. But at the same time, if the more self-explanatory headings these journals use, normally they also ask the author to include a conclusion. Okay, so in the way they're giving liberty to organize the structure of the manuscript as the researcher sees best, but they're also forcing him, look, okay, set up your story as you think it's best, but make sure you include a conclusion so that you have a space where the reader can easily find the take-home messages. So my answer will be there's the most common variation is self-explanatory headings, particularly in the introduction and the discussion and methods, but it's always followed by a conclusion normally.
I'm curious if you're trying to analyze a paper or like just get more into literature, what section should you be looking to first if you're trying to absorb results in an economical way?
Well, actually, we have another video exactly dedicated to that question, which is going to be addressing how to read a paper, how to identify strengths, values, and interests. So if you permit me, I will invite you to come on board on that video, and then that answer will be more complete and actually will be more interesting in the context I'm going to be giving there, if you don't mind. But as a quick answer, not to leave you empty-handed, what you have to realize, particularly if you haven't read many papers and you're not a very experienced researcher, the quality of what gets published, the quality of writing of what gets published is not guaranteed. What I'm saying, in other words, that the science that gets published is valid and it's correct and it's useful. But the way the manuscripts are written around that science is not always ideal, because it's not the journal editor or the reviewer's job or functions to optimize the writing of the document. They'll identify issues and ask for changes, but it's not their responsibility. So what I'm saying, in other words, is that you could, as a first answer to your question, use the abstract to find out, is this research interesting for me? What did they got? And how can I use it in my day-to-day basis? Its usefulness. If the abstract was well written, that will be the location to find it. Okay, so if a good abstract is present, then you will have all the necessary information to make the decision. Yes, this paper I definitely want to go through. This one I do not, because it goes in different avenues and explore different directions. That's not really what I'm currently doing. But unfortunately, many publications are not well written. Many of the researchers contrary to you, do not receive training in scientific writing. They learn as they go, normally influenced by the styles of their own supervisors. And that implies very often that it's either incomplete or it's normally just focusing on a particular aspect, and it doesn't do a good job of informing the target reader. Very often the level of information does not match the expectations and the knowledge of the target reader. So it's not a straightforward answer in the sense that it depends what's in front of you. But if you have to choose, I would strongly advise you read the abstract and read the conclusion. If a conclusion section is not there, read the final paragraph of the discussion. Those would be the two locations to inform you and to identify what's the value of this research for my daily research as well.
Is there any reason why CF publication is kind of being broken down in this way, or does it just kind of happen naturally over time?
Well, it happened naturally over time in the sense that, again, what you have to realize is the very specialized journals, the ones that are really focused on subtopics within computer science, which is a huge umbrella, they realized that the type of research being done in there is more compatible with some particular formats than others. And they realized that, well, this IMDRaD, this very fixed IMDRaD structure is not really compatible on the type of research we're doing, the type of information we have to convey. So we believe that it's in the reader's best interest to create self-explanatory headings. And it works fine. I'm not of the field, and I've read many papers of computer science, and it's easy enough to follow, at least in terms of the rationale. Of course, I don't understand everything, but that's what it means. These sections were created, and some liberty in computer science is given to the author to have the opportunity to organize information from the reader's point of view. What's the best layout for the reader to follow our rationale, to follow our protocol, and to go through our line of thoughts. So that's why some of them believe, well, the type of research that we publish is so variable within this field, it can be approached from many different ways with new solutions, that we have to leave some flexibility for the author to organize information in a way he thinks is best from the reader's point of view. But it's something that should not hamper you or should create, let's say, a challenge, because even in the options of these self-explanatory headings, you might want to opt simply to call it methods, and within methods, you create a subtopic A and a subtopic B, and that's it. And it doesn't have to be very painful when you're actually given liberty, which sometimes actually backfires. And some people work best with a rigid structure. But if you find under such an option, you can easily select the traditional ones and you'll be fine. And you have to understand that when you submit a manuscript for publication, there's going to be a lot of room for improvement. And what you submit is in your own mind, and taking into consideration the target audience needs, it's in your own mind the best version, the best way to tell your story. If the editor or the reviewer find that there's some tweaking, some alterations that need to be done, there's going to be room and time in place to do it. So it's not like what you submit is what will be accepted or rejected. No, if the science is sound, then there's going to be comments from those people trying to improve the manuscript up to some extent. And so they might not agree with some of the headings you created. They might ask for reorganization of those headings, but nothing major, nothing you cannot cope with. So this should not be a challenge to you. And normally you should follow the rules of the journal or the conference and wait to see the feedback that these evaluators have to give you. So what I decided to do also today was to share with you a couple of examples, very different ones in computer science. One is published in the conference, so tools for game theoretic models of security for cryptocurrencies. And another one is a little bit, let's say, more generalistic. It was published in the journal Computers in Human Behavior. So I'm going to just showcase to you So this first PDF shows this paper I was showing you. And if you look at the left-hand side, simply at the structure, the way it's organized, it has some of these variations that I've just presented to you. Okay, I'm just emphasizing everything. So it has something that is called, first of all, of course, has the title and it has the abstract. And the length of this abstract is given by the journal or the conference guidelines normally. And afterwards, these authors, either through conference, probably the conference pushed for this organization, they asked for an introduction, and in that introduction is followed by related work. So it's actually, normally it's easier to go through the paper itself. It helps. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. It's just to show you variation. So here's an abstract, and I'm going to be covering what type of information can be expected to find in an abstract. And then there's section 1 called Introduction. And this is where the positioning of the research question is normally made. Okay, it's where they explain the motivation behind this research question instead of any other. And then they have a section called Methodology, followed by that variation of our contributions. It's very typical. So this major section called Introduction, which is number 1, is subdivided by their own creation in methodology, our contributions. And then something very important happens, and I will use this example to showcase this to you. Because the paper is quite long, it has 20 pages, and it has multiple numbering of sections. What they've done is essential. What they've done at the end of the introduction, which is the first part where the paper is positioned and the expected contributions are given. This last paragraph, I hope you can read. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. This paragraph introduces the reader to the framework of the rest of the paper. So section 3 is going to be introducing game theory and cryptocurrencies. Section 4, they're going to look at the intersection of cryptography and game theory. And that's going to be followed by another intersection in section 5. And then they're going to see the application of those results in section 6. And in section 7, they give a comparative table of some of the concepts. So when you have multiple self-explanatory headings or even multiple headings, either forced by the journal or the conference or by your own creation, it's very important to have very early on, normally in the first couple of pages, to have this paragraph dedicated to set the reader's expectations and to provide him or her the layout of what to expect ahead. Otherwise, it might be difficult to follow your line of thought. And so I encourage you to follow this example in this aspect because it is absolutely essential when you have such a multiplication of headings and sublevels. The related work, section number 2, is called related work. Let's call it also literature review. In a traditional IMDRaD section, this will still be part of the introduction because the related work is to say, look, this is what we know so far, and this is what we don't know. And the expectation is that our research, our paper, is going to address partially or totally one of those unknowns. Section 3 is called background, where they teach the reader on background knowledge. So when, particularly when the potential target audience can be very variable in knowledgeable level, it's quite wise to have a subsection dedicated to give the fundamentals of the theory behind this research. So this is what they actually do here. They introduce game theoretical tools that are mentioned throughout the paper. So there's a sense of teaching of background information. And then they subdivide it in other self-explanatory headings, definitely not imposed by the journal. There's quite a few, 3.02, 0.3, and there is another 0.4, at least 3 sublevels. And then they start with self-explanatories from this point onwards. So cryptography and game theory, it could be anything else. It has sublevels, and it goes through. So all of these are titles that they decided to use to categorize the information as they went. It's not immediately easy to see if they are part of methods or if they're part of results and what level of results. But hopefully an expert in the field should be able to understand what it is. However, these authors were quite clever and quite thorough in the sense that at the beginning of each major section, which has self-explanatory headings, they gave a brief introduction of its content. So in this section, we present the work, there is an intersection of blah, 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 etc., etc. Okay, so it's very useful because it facilitates the reading flow. Because you have to understand that the reader as it reads, it has to grasp your line of thought the way you set up your story. So it's quite important to provide these auxiliary pieces of information to facilitate that capture of information in the right way. And it goes on. There's quite a subdivision, it's quite a big research with a lot of sub-levels of information. But I will take you further down until the end, until something that is called a discussion, okay? So probably when you see these standardized names per sections, these normally are part of the guidelines of the journal of the conference. Those that are variations normally are the aspects they allow you to be creative in the titles. But this one for sure normally is mandatory. And they interpret the results within the context. Okay. There's a lot of that going on here. And they also have a conclusion. And as I've been saying before, if there isn't a separate conclusion section, normally corresponds to the last paragraph of the discussion. And normally it's quite short because it acts a little bit in the same way as the abstract. So the abstract should contain the essential information of what was done, why was done, how was done, what was found, and what it means. The conclusion should have two main pieces of information. It's what are the impacts of what you found when you insert the new evidence into the old state of the art? So what has changed? In this case, they have highlighted existing concepts and explained how and where they could be used for specific applications. So they've tried out applications of existing concepts and figure out which ones worked in what way. And then the second main piece of information in a good conclusion is what should be done next. So what they're advocating is no complete new theory has appeared, and it would be interesting to see a new theory built from ground up to address considerations rather than adapting existing model. So they're putting forward future step in this research field. So these are normally the most common two pieces of information to find in the conclusion. And then the references show. So this was this paper. Now this one that was published in Computers in Human Behavior. I'm hoping you're still with me. Yes, you are. Thank you. This one is organized a little bit differently. So if you look here at the structure on the left, it reads much more like the standardized IMDRaD section. There's a section called Introduction, second one called Literature Review, which if it didn't exist would be a part of the introduction. Then the proposed research model, it's the objective, it's what they're setting out to test. Normally, if there isn't a subdivision like this, it would be the final part of the introduction, where you set up the research hypothesis that you decided to test. And then it has the standardized sections, a method section, results, discussion, and conclusion merged. And this can happen. Some journals force you to have it merged, others separate, others leave it up to you. As long as you know what they want, go for it and you'll be fine, because the type of information inserted is exactly the same. And if they are merged, the only difference is that that last paragraph corresponds to the conclusion. They decided to separate study implications and limitations in a final subsection, but it will be easily enough to expect it to be within a discussion section as well. Okay, well, I don't have much need to go through here the entire manuscript. I will give you this these files, access to these files, but I highlighted in blue some of the main informations to expect within the different sections. But as the names imply, these are self-explanatory. It's very easy to understand where we're going to pick up this type of information. Okay, So these are two small examples of what are the variations you can find in scientific papers. And they can be slightly different, but they all correspond to the same thing in the sense of type of information. And I'm going to give you in the next few slides what to do with the insert in each of those sections. So in terms of length, it also depends on the journal. For those that never written a paper, normally it's a good manuscript is allowed to go up to 8,000 words, normally around 5, but it really depends on the scientific field. But a standardized length can correspond to some of these figures I'm showcasing in this slide. Something between 15 to 20 pages would be a healthy length of a manuscript. But you need to check, first of all, in the journal guidelines and conference proceedings, what is the maximum, and then work with that. And so you need to know that limit before you set out your story, so you can proportionally allocate information to the different sections that you include. Now, in terms of the contents of these main sections, I'm going to introduce you. This is, let's say, the foundational slide for the next ones are showing up. I'm going to address what type of contents and relationships exist between the sections. You have to understand that a good paper corresponds to a story. It's a story with a beginning, middle, and an end. And the expectations of this organization of this structure is that the introduction sets out and answers the question, what have you done and why is it needed currently? Why do we need your research now instead of any other? In terms of methods, how you collected the data and what were decisions you made around collection and analyzing of that data, so that the reader can validate your approach to address the research questions just presented in the introduction. The results, where are the most compelling evidence? And normally we have to be selective. We don't have space to include all our results. So we have to choose those pieces of information that support better our argumentation and enable us to address the research question posed in the introduction. And then the discussion, interpret, make sense, digest that new evidence in the context of the state of the art. So, and the final end of it is what should be changing in the field, what are changes in perceptions based on what you found. So this is a very major, let's say, paintbrush of what these sections should contain and of course their variations. But what you as authors, you have to understand there's quite a concrete line between being an author of a manuscript and being a reader of a manuscript. Because when you're reading, you want to be fed information in a useful way so that you can easily interpret it and take it on board on your day-to-day research. From an author point of view, your aim is to write the manuscript in a coherent and argumentative and incremental way so that you're taking the reader by the hand and persuading as you go. Because any piece of research based on the results, same results can be interpreted or can be made sense or explained in perhaps different angles. And you have to persuade that your interpretation, your explanation of the changes in the state of art are those that are more logical. So argumentation is one of your main weapons in terms of writing manuscripts. And you have to be persuasive because any paper can be written very differently by different authors based on the same results again. So you have to realize as author, I have to talk about what I've done and what I've found in the most logical way. And the best strategy is to think of a manuscript as a three-part system. It has a beginning, has a middle, and it has an end. So it has to be a story, almost like Once Upon a Time story, where someone decided to go on a mission. They found these problems, they chose these paths, they encountered rewards, treasures, and how did things change at the end of that mission. So a good paper, and it's something that it will distinguish you from competition. You have to realize that it's not enough nowadays in terms of competition of career to publish a lot and to do very good research. It's also about publishing the best journals. And the best journals want to use stories that take the reader by the hand and talk about in the beginning, why do we need this research? Why are you opening this question in the state of the art at the moment? Why do we need this? Then they provide the evidence to tackle that need, that research aim. And then towards the end, based on that evidence, these are our answers to that research questions. These are the things we identified as changes in the current state of the art. So if you read through a good paper, at the beginning, you are opened, you are challenged to go with the author, to go through an aim. The author in the next sections tries to persuade in the method, you as an author try to persuade the reader in the methods. This is the best angle of attack to this research question. This is what we found, and then based on what we found, these are interpretations or conclusions. And some people might have different interpretations based on some results. So towards the end, at the closure of the story, you have to go back, address that research question you opened at the end of the introduction, and give it a closure. So, okay, we set ourselves to do this. By the end of things, this is what we got, and these are the implications. So this is a very good paper if it's set out like a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. In terms of details of setting up the different sections, these are the main types of information that should be included in each one of them. So the introduction is where you should aim to introduce the topic and its current importance. So basically describe, this is what we know so far, but we still don't know something. You either identify next a problem or a gap. So first of all, you have to give a sense to the reader. Look, it's very important at the moment to look at this topic. Okay. Within that topic, this is what we know, this is what we don't know. And then immediately after that, in a logical sequence, we set ourselves to tackle this problem either partially or totally, and we set the specific objectives of this specific hypothesis. And what is expected is that those specific objectives are there to address the gaps, or at least some of them they are just identified. You don't have to identify them all. You can identify simply the one that your research question is going to try to tackle. But a good introduction has at least these three pieces of information that set the reader's expectations on the potential contribution of this work and provides persuasion on, okay, yeah, I need to read this. This is very important questions that they set themselves to answer. So I'm going to want to go through. The methods, it's all about detail on what was your battle plan to collect evidence to address that research question. Okay, so it's really giving the nitty-gritty, all the steps, all the decisions made in terms of the numbers were collected and how you're going to analyze them. Because the next section, the result, is a sub-selection of all the evidence you got and explaining what they are. So figures, tables, and all of those things that can be considered as a result that are the evidence that enable you to address the research question posed at the end of the introduction. The discussion very simply showcases and interprets how that evidence allows you to fill or contribute to solve the problem or to fill the gap in knowledge. So you normally compare, we found this is similar, this is different from previous studies. And by being different or similar, you are expected to make conclusions, interpretations of what does it mean in terms of the knowledge of the system functioning. And then the conclusion, it's all about what changed in the field, implications, and going forward, what you believe, you as the leading author, what you believe should be the next steps, and how can this new knowledge of the system functioning can be used by your peers. At the conclusion, that's always what you're trying to do, is to persuade people, look, reuse what I've produced in your own day-to-day research. So it's in your best interest to identify our results have implications in field A, field B, and field C, or in context A, or for end user 1, end user 2, and etc. The more you do that for the reader, the better the chances are of someone relating to what you're implying, their uses of what you found. And that's what you want at the end of the day, for people to reuse what you've done. Because That will for sure increase the citation numbers and will push science forward much faster. So what you see that is happening is there's here a little bit backwards and forwards in terms of level of information detail. So this diagram that I'm showing you is not by chance that the pyramids are inverted. So the introduction is expected to go from the general to the specific, starts with the topic, its importance, and ends with the specific research objectives that address gaps. And then the method is all about detail, very, very specific. And you might be asking, well, how much detail? What's the level I should go for? And the answer is variable. It depends on the journal, depends on the conference and the space that you're given. So the first suggestion would be go and read papers of that conference or papers of that journal and get familiarized with the level of detail of similar research and go stick with that in your first version that you submit. You should be fine. The second part of the manuscript, it's a normal pyramid because it goes from the specific to the general. The main results enable to start the discussion with a main conclusion that should address, that should start closing the introduction, okay, the research that you opened in the introduction. And you start extrapolating and making implications based on that new change of the current knowledge of the system functioning, okay? So it goes also to the general because you try to go a little bit more, it's extrapolate within reasonable sense, but you try to put forward that your research has important contributions. And in that sense, you're going again for the more general impact and identifying context and end users for those circumstances. Okay, so for those that never written a paper, you might recognize this structure and this type of contents in well-written papers. In some papers or in many papers, you're not going to find necessarily these pieces of information in the right places. Again, because a lot of people are trained as researchers, but not trained as scientific authors. These next slides are here to try to help you in your first draft when you're trying to write the first draft of the paper. I go a little bit in more detail on what each section should be doing. Particularly for those that are a bit more green in these aspects, it's quite important to have these foundations, so you can understand better the next few slides that address also the essentials and the more detailed, the high level approaches that you can have. Because I'm going to be providing you with some tools you might wish to consider that facilitates the writing, and these tools have a very important match with these foundations. So that's why I want to make sure I go through with them with you. But again, if I'm going either unclearly or too fast, let me know and we'll clarify any issue you might have. So the title, it's in a ways is one of the most difficult things to write because you have a line or two maximum to be creative and to be interesting, to grab the reader's attention. But in actuality, a good title has two parts. It has at least two elements, a topic and a focus. So the topic is all about what is the context, what is the field. The focus is within that field, what did you exactly try to do or what you found. So I'm going to go back to the PDFs to show you these two elements, if you allow me. So hopefully you're seeing this PDF as well. So this first title, the first part of the title is actually the topic. In what realm, let's say, are we on? Well, we are in the realm of SOC, okay? And within that realm of SOC, which could be pretty much everything of that topic, we focus on the tools for gaining theoretical models of security for cryptocurrencies. So for all of the different things you could be doing inside SOC, we decided to do this. So this first part is the topic, this second part is the focus. In this second example that we have today is exactly the same thing. Sharing and storage behavior via cloud computing. So I'm within this topic. This research is looking at this particular issue of cloud computing. Within that, what did we exactly set ourselves to do? Well, we decided to look for security and privacy in research and practice. So normally, good titles always have these two pieces of information. They have a topic and they have a focus, because that enables the reader better to understand, well, is the topic of my interest, and within that topic, what they set themselves to do, is it interesting, is it pertinent, is it useful? So it should always be like this. So the key questions, the question, in terms of the reader's point of view, the title tries to persuade the reader that the study is interesting. And in terms of contents, what you should be aiming here is something that it can be tricky at the early stages of your career in terms of writing, which is you have to be careful in choosing the right words, because it's the first thing that a reader reads. And if you don't choose the right words, or if you decide to use words that are unfamiliar potential to the target audience, you might lose their interest. They're going to get confused. They might not really be interested at all. So get familiarized with the wording, the technical wording of your scientific field, and choose the right words for the target audience of the journal or the conference you're going to be choosing to submit to. Because if it's a more generalistic audience, you might not be you're not sure if they recognize the term, then you might wish to replace it in the title with a more familiar one from the reader's point of view. If it's for a specialized journal, your expectation is that the readers know as much as you do about the topic, then you can go straight forward with specialized vocabulary. But this is something you need to manage according to who's going to be on the other side reading. The abstract. The objectives, if it's well written, is to provide a complete summary of all the sections. So it has the key take-home message of all the other 4 sections: introduction, method, results, and discussion, eventually conclusion. And in that sense, it informs, it's the best element to inform the reader to make a decision. Yes, what's within this manuscript interests me, and I can see the scope of it. So what you should be aiming for here is to market. And I'm implying the word in its true sense. You have to write sentences that identify value of what the research is, what was done, and what was found. Because if you don't do that here in the abstract, you're missing an opportunity to get the readers on your side. So if this is the element that people choose to decide, should I read or not, because normally students, they get access for free, then this is where you have to invest your marketing language, sentences that convey value, that persuades the reader that what you have to offer is what they want. In terms of content, because it corresponds to the 4 main sections, you should be including in this sequence research topic and its importance, gap or problem address, your objective, your main results, and the change in the field. Hopefully also your approach to targeting that objective, the method itself. Okay, so it has 4 main pieces of information: what you've done and why, how you've done it, what did you find, and what does it mean. So 4 main pieces. The keywords are there to be used by the search databases. Okay, so the search engine, sorry, the extra words to make the publication found, it should be using synonyms, not repeat words from the title. The idea is to make it more findable by using more words that search engines might get hits on. The introduction is where you should be aiming to summarize what is known, identify limitations in the state of the art, persuade why we need this research at the moment, not later, not in the past, and within that ambition of trying to tackle a problem or to advance the field, what is specifically the research objective you set yourself to do. In terms of key question, what the reader wants is, what is the hypothesis that you tested? Normally set out as a hypothesis, even in the realm of computer science. If not, you can write it as a research question. So the introduction includes objectives, motives, research importance, literature review, state of the art, all of these things that set out the position this research in relation to others. So you have to identify differences and showcase the added value by having your research at the moment, and in what way it differs from previous ones and how it proposes itself to advance the field. Because if you don't do this actively, the reader will not get there by himself. and the editors and the viewers will start identifying, well, I'm not really sure, the authors are not persuasive that this is of interest to our readers, because they don't identify the novelty, they don't put forward potential advancements, and they don't withdraw take-home message conclusions that actually will make a change in the researchers' lives. So you have to do this actively. The methods is where you provide systematic approaches that validate the study, and the level of detail. The rule is provide the level of detail that enables repeating the experiment or the research exactly the same way. So that's the level you should be going for. And it's normally where you have to provide information on the study system if you're going for a more generalized reader, where you have to give some background knowledge on what we already know the functioning of the system. The key question is, how was the hypothesis tested? And the contents are, anything is valid pretty much. Equipment, data analysis, data collection approach, study conditions, it really depends on the field. But it's pretty much how you set yourself to collect evidence. The results are where you select the evidence. Normally this corresponds to statistical analysis, figures, tables, and you pretty much describe the outcome of what was the method section. It can be pretty much anything. And nowadays the journals and even some conferences allow you to upload and to make it available digitally, supplementary information, supplementary results, things like videos, which in wording you cannot put. So be aware of those opportunities. The key question here is what was found. So it includes, of course, all elements used for analysis that support data interpretation. The discussion corresponds to this, I did start to answering the research question. So this is where we start closing the story. We open the introduction. We relate the facts. So we compare our results to what we currently know so far. We identify things moving forward, things that stay the same. We open new questions. Very often the discussions don't provide definite answers. Sometimes the answer to the research question is not yes or no. It's a step forward, but doesn't give a full answer. So we have to identify those limits of those answers and identify what were exactly the contributions of the evidence that we found, okay? So we identify the importance and meaning of those results. And this is where we evaluate their quality. We, of course, say if something went wrong, if there was any limitation in the study, this is also where we address. But most of all, we have to do a very good job of identifying what was the scientific advancement, okay? The conclusion, it's all about identifying the impact of research. So what should change in the field, and it includes things like new knowledge of the system function. So from our paper onwards, we cannot do as we've been doing before. We have to do it in this new way because now we know this that we didn't know before. If there's any potential contributions for other subfields or adjoining fields or context or even future research, this is where you should actively also put that information. Anything you can add that can be useful, even if not definite conclusions from your research, will add value to the discussion. And the way you manage this type of information is the more you add and identify value, the better chances of you publishing in the best journal. And that can really make a difference in your career in many, many ways. So being a good researcher, but being a good author, marry very well to take you further and to actually open doors for you to gain access to the best labs, including protocol labs and potentially others. The references are there to provide external supporting evidence to those claims. So you're making claims, you're giving a reference, and the expectation is that the reader goes through that reference if it needs to know more about the claim that you're making. So there are sources of further topic exploitation. I already mentioned, use the most updated ones that exist and use maximum 2 references per claim. You want to keep this number reasonably low. So what I would suggest for you that at the early stages of preparing a manuscript is use these detailed slides and their contents to build a pretty rough first draft of your sections and their contents. But they can be very useful as a checklist to make sure that at least the storyline is set up with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and all the key information is there. This slide shows you in a very graphical way that all of these sections, even if they are different names, they all relate to each other. Of course, the title is related to the abstract because the focus here, the focus you put in the title, is going to be the focus of the abstract. So the title is either focused on the objective or on the main result and its implication. Depends what's more exciting from the reader's point of view. So that's normally the criteria used. Is it what we found that will grab people's attention, or is it what we set ourselves to do? And then we decide that level of information to the title. If that's the focus, that's the juicy part of our research, then that will be also a big part of the abstract and a big angle of writing it. So they're correlated. The abstract receives the 4 main pieces of information of all the other 4. So we normally have around 250 words for an abstract. So it's a couple of sentences, not copy-paste, have to be new sentences, but key message from introduction, like objective and importance, methods, what was the main angle, results, 2 or 3 main evidences, and from the discussion, a couple, 2, 3 impacts of what you found or interpretations. Normally, the final sentence of the abstract comes from the conclusion, which is, this research was useful because the contribution, why is it a game changer? That should be the focus of the abstract. And of course, the introduction has to be married or written in close collaboration with the discussion, because here at the end of the introduction, you open the story, in the discussion, you start closing. So the scopes, the topics that you put in introduction will have to correspond to those used in the discussion. Okay, and the expectation here as well in this bidirectional relationship is that the conclusion kind of is an outcome of the discussion. So in the discussion is, when I insert this new piece of the puzzle into the existing pieces of that puzzle, this is now our new image of the system function. This is how the puzzle changed. By now having this new perspective on the puzzle image, these are the consequences. This should be the next piece we should be researching, and these are the implications based on what I found. So it's a consequence, it's a derivation of everything that you put in the discussion. So this slide is just to visually show you that these cannot be written independently. They have to be well interlinked and set up in a way that opens, develops, and closures. That is the best way to set up a good manuscript. In terms of strategies to really have a great content, so I have here some of the most important steps. Of course, check the journal guidelines before writing, so know the rules. Study and go and see examples of previous publications in that journal, in that conference, so get familiarized with the style. Eventually go as far as choose a model paper, model publication that is compatible with similar research to what you're going to be doing, and have that by your side to act a little bit as a guide and an inspiration to set up your story, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's absolutely fine to structure a paper in a similar way that has been done before, in a way that is expected because the structure is more or less rigid. So all the sections are pretty similar and the expectations of their contents are exactly the same. And then, of course, select the results, because that's going to be the center of the storyline. You have to decide what you have and how you're going to interpret it. And then prepare a section roadmap that I advocate for you to share with co-authors on online platforms before you write the section. I'm going to show you very briefly what the section roadmap is and how it can be used. You have access to that file later. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because it's quite a lengthy document, but the idea is that you set up here with this roadmap, the skeleton of the contents of the section. You have 2, 3 pages of the manuscript where you insert the key take-home message you want to include per section in a ready order that you think it's best. So before you invest a lot of time in writing pages and paragraphs and having the co-authors taking everything out and criticizing a lot, so you put everybody on board of, let's all agree what's going to be the backbone of our storyline. And before we put the meat into the bones, let's discuss about this sequence and this content. So it saves a lot of time and a lot of drafts versions. It's pretty good. So this roadmap, I'm going to show you how it looks. So this is a reverse mode roadmap example that I've done for this publication. So there's this paper published, you have a reference here, optimal virtual network function placement in multi-cloud service functioning chaining architecture. Again, I'm not of the field. So what I've done, and if the paper is well written, is that I'm able to write backwards the skeleton of the paper, and it corresponds to bullet points. So if you see what I've done, and you can read this with more time in your own time, your free time, what I've done is in bullet points, identified what type of information was being given. So this first sentence you can find in the abstract of this paper corresponds to the topic. Then there's more sentences that give a little bit more detail on that topic. Then there's a sentence dedicated to set out the problem. Okay, yeah, exactly that. And then what is important to solve the problem? So there's a problem here. Why is it important to solve? And this sentence does that. So I copy paste the sentence. And then they highlighted the chosen approach to tackle that problem. They gave the work aim, the approach to meet the aim, and so forth. So I've done all of this. This is the abstract, still results, study contributions. So these are two sentences that address the study contributions. I'm still within the abstract, but if I zoom out, what you see is that these are pretty much bullet points, okay, of the type of information that is expected to find in an abstract. And I copy paste the sentence that give exactly these types. And I've done this to all the sections of the paper. It has an introduction where the first paragraph is doing something. So bullet point 1 with a sub bullet point 2. Second paragraph is doing this, the third, and so forth. The sixth paragraph has quite a lot of bullet points, actually, and so forth. And then it comes to related work, other self-explanatory headings, conclusions, and too many conclusions at the end. So this is a real publication that I'm created the skeleton, that roadmap. So I reverse engineered the paper to derive these bullet points. What I encourage you is to use this example to set up the first draft of your paper exactly in this format, as sections with bullet points and sublevels of bullet points that identify the skeleton of the storyline. Share this storyline with the co-authors to get validation, and then invest in developing these bullet points into paragraphs, adding meat to that skeleton, and eventually the skin at the editing stage, if you allow me the analogy. So this is one of the most efficient, effort-efficient strategies to set up a good story, is to create a bullet point document with the key messages, share it early on, get a validation, and then develop, okay? And when you're focusing here, you have a full story with beginning and middle, and then that reads interestingly from the target reader's point of view. Of course, at this moment, you're going to be choosing the references to include in that roadmap, so you can already insert in that document which citations you're going to be using. And I would encourage you also, first of all, to write the abstract, because after you have this roadmap, the first thing you should be doing is write the abstract, because it's very important to visualize the whole before you write the parts. So you make sure there's a logical connection and incremental logical flow between the different sections, and you guide the reader by the hand exactly, because you know how they're linked, and you create a sequence that establish those connections. So in the abstract, try to do this, to have this whole before you write the parts, and focus, of course, on the research added values, because this is where you have to sell the worth of the research and the impact of the manuscript of the paper per se, let's say. So some final strategies or guidelines to achieve this: lead the reader by the hand, so develop the right expectations and create those small paragraphs, as I show you in the PDFs, that introduce the reader to the framework of what to expect in the next sections, provide overviews, particularly at the start of multi-heading sections, because it really helps for the reader to conceptualize how the document is organized, identify the value in all sections. Really, this is absolutely key to get published in a very good journal and to receive a lot of attention. And make sure that your research is used by the right people. So think about gaps, problems to be solved, current importance, cite authorities to say, someone has said this is very important to do now, expected research contribution and impacts. And then, of course, we talked about connecting the sections in terms of start, middle, and end, open and closure of the story. And then the headings titles should enable the reader to self-guide as it goes in terms of understanding the structure of the manuscript. Normally, it's between adjacent paragraphs that we might create logical gaps. So go there to see if there's a reading flow happening. If the topic change between paragraphs is not too great, or at least try to establish that connection, because that really helps to have a sense that this is a paper that is very well written and I fully understand the storyline. If the reader has to make multiple stops as it goes to understand what did they just say, how does it relate to the next paragraph, then the reader is not focused on the science anymore, he's focused on trying to understand the way you write. And that's the ultimate obstacle you have to remove in your manuscript. Okay, you want the reader to focus on the science, not on your writing style. The writing style has to facilitate the flow. And of course, the importance of closing the story and identify, if you can quantify if possible, how you advance to start the advanced state of the art and by how much. Finally, I don't know if you have any questions. I'm giving you an overview on how, the structure of a scientific publication, its variations, and how the different elements should be set out, the type of contents and their objectives from the reader's point of view. In this final couple of slides, I have the tools that facilitate somehow this process, but what I'm showing you now is our three tools that I consider useful. They have free, they're either free or they have free versions. So I invite you in that context. I'm not advertising for anything, not getting any royalties, whatever. But I recommend, based on my experience, they use Scholar-C as an article summarizing tool. It's incredibly useful when you're doing literature reviews and to get an artificial intelligent algorithm to identify the valid points, the interesting points of a paper that you're reading. Okay, so some of these functionalities that you create, you're able to create quick access libraries and summaries of each publication. So I'm going to show you how it looks like. It summarizes a whole paper and makes it very easy to cite and find the right information. It has something that's incredibly useful, which is a flashcard example. So I'm going to show you how it looks. So this is an online app, pretty much, where, as you can see, you can create libraries and you can create by topics or by whatever you wish. So I created one called Computer Science, and I subdivided into 3 folders: subtopics, blockchain, so papers I've read on blockchain, papers I've read on cryptocurrencies, papers on security and privacy, whatever. Okay, you can choose pretty much anything. And what it does is, when you're reading these papers online, you can import them here to this library, and you can start collating all the references and the papers you might want to be citing in a manuscript. So it's very useful to create a library almost per manuscript, because you can have all the referencing information here right in the click of your hand. And one of the things that I find it very, very useful is I'm choosing one of those papers that I read, and I'm opening its flashcard. The element that I mentioned is quite useful. So what this software does is that it summarizes and analyzes the juicy bits of the manuscript. So it has, of course, a main highlight, etc. Then it has something that is called summary flashcard. And it has things like key concepts, summary of the abstract, its highlights, a summary that it does by itself. It has the figures, full text, and then you can see all the different sections that the manuscript has in terms of what the algorithm found as most interesting in each one of them. So In the abstract, what, for instance, this flashcard is showing is that the information is blue corresponds to important points, and the information in red corresponds to contributions. So if you want, let's say, a supporting tool to identify the value of the work very quickly, is this article good, and what does it do, what does it have? You can import it here, have this run, and you can have digestion information for you. It does other things like highlight the most important pieces of information. Okay, so it went and got the objective, the importance of that objective, the results. So we show how something can provide speed ups and benefits. So these are the consequences, the implications of what they found. So probably this bullet point is an interpretation coming from the discussion or from the conclusion. And so forth. It has summaries for the different sections. So you don't have to read everything if you don't want to. You bring those publications here and you just read these summaries that are done by the software. It can be quite long. Let's open it. And then it has all the things. It imports the figures and their legends, and it's basically, it does a summary of the main important parts of the work, okay, of the publication. Even though it has the conclusion and the future work itself. So it goes and picks up where are the sentences that are giving conclusions, where are the sentences that are giving future work. So it can really be very useful for you either to get practice in reading papers and writing papers, or as a library to support the writing process itself. Everything is here, and you can easily decide, oh, I'm going to be using this reference to support this claim, or the bullet point X of my roadmap. So I recommend it for you to explore it a little bit, because it can speed up a lot the reading and the writing itself. What I actually advocate for you to do is to be quite clever in one of the unexplored use of this tool, is when you have a pretty good first draft of your manuscript, upload it here to this software and run the analysis. And what you should be expecting is if you've written correctly, the software, the algorithm should be able to pick up the right information in the right way. So what identified as a contribution, yes, it does correspond to the contribution. What identified as the objective, yes, it is the objective. And if you get good feedback from this algorithm, you have an extra level of confidence that things are pretty well, or if it doesn't, you can identify where there might be a problem, because the way you write will help or not the function of the algorithm. So it's very important for you to get feedback on your writing style, and this algorithm can tell you, yeah, well, you wrote in a confusing way because it was obvious they couldn't pick up the right information in the right locations. So you might use it as a feedback interface for you to improve your own writing style. Grammarly and Trinca are editing their writing softwares, nothing to do with the previous one. So the idea is that if your level of English, or if you want to take your writing capacity to an extra level, Grammarly is particularly useful because it allows you to choose, look at my document from the point of view of publication. So it has gender specific checks. So it tells you, I have a scientific paper in this manuscript, check it under those demands, or under those lenses. Okay, it flags a lot of potential issues. It tends to optimize your writing style. If you have a tendency for using a lot of past tense voice, it will signal that to you and push you for active voice, which is much more economic and streamlined, definitely better from the reading point of view, and will upgrade your level of writing academically. Trinca also works in that direction, and it also has subject-specific checks. And it can also, you can also customize enhancements to match conventions or best practice in your own field. And it can also work as a plugin. So I encourage you to explore them a little bit if you think they can be useful, because they have, again, free options that at their stage are already very useful for you to either develop your current capacity or get feedback and identify where you can get better as an author, as a writer in the context of scientific writing. Okay, they are designed, or at least they give you the option under those contexts, those situations. So that was it for me in this brief webinar or seminar on what are the common structure of a scientific publication, how it should be organized, its content, and some of the tools that you might wish to consider in terms of supporting the development of a good storyline. The vehicle or the tool you choose to communicate what you're researching, it can be a blog, it can be a YouTube channel, it can be your own web page that you develop, it can be pretty much anything nowadays. And no matter what the vehicle you choose to communicate, the rule is always the same. Find the format that A, meets the target reader's expectations, and then make it flow when you understand what are the characteristics of the target audience. So it's always the same thing, even if you're writing a book, if you're writing for a magazine, no matter what you're doing, when you're communicating sciences, who's going to be on the other side? What do they know? What, in what way can I facilitate the uptake of the information? So it depends on what you do. In a blog post, I'm sure that graphics and schemes and even comics are extremely useful to take the reader as we go. I read a lot of blogs, and some of the posts are even 5,000 words. But in the middle, they create very easy to read graphics, or there's another one that I follow. I find it very interesting that the author designs and creates cartoons to support the storyline as he goes. And that's very creative, very useful. So it's always who's going to be on the other side and how do I think I can resonate with them? Who are they? What are their characteristics? And if I recognize they're interested in what I have to say, what would be the option or the format that more easily would take them on board, will make them understand? And there's a very easy way to check that is design a couple of options, give it to what you believe are your target audience, some examples, some people, and see which one do you prefer. Or even better, I do this with some of my papers, I encourage my students to do so. Write their papers, then give it to a family member or to a friend, someone that is not academic, and ask them to tell you what did they learn and what are the take-home message. If you wrote it well, they should be able to pick up on those take-home message, even if they don't scientifically understand them. In a blog post, it's exactly the same thing. Try out a few layouts, get feedback, and see the ones that might work best for the characteristics of your target audience. I think this is very important for people to realize that when you publish a blog post, when you create a video on YouTube, when you publish a paper, when you go to a conference, it's not you talking to you, to yourself. So in your own mind, everything makes sense and it's easy to follow. But you're trying to address other people's needs. And they may have different points of view. So you always have to put yourself on the other side and then make an informed decision. I think, okay, for me, this will be better, but I can see that perhaps that way, someone that doesn't know as much as I do would benefit from. And by default, use more detail, more images, more information, more elements to support. So error by excess, not by minimum, by lack of. And that's what I would advise you. But of course, what you ask is very different from the context we are at the moment. But it's always around who's on the other side listening and how can I make it easier for them.
I was unaware of Scholar C, and it looks super interesting. So I'm definitely going to look into it.
No, explore it. It really, really is. It's reasonably new. I think it has a couple of years, and it can. It's like nowadays. All of us use something like Mendeley to create virtual libraries that help a lot. But this digestion of the documents can really speed up the reading and the organization of the libraries. You can easily annotate, use this for that, use that one for that, and it really speeds up things. I like it quite a lot. Thank you very much for all your technical support and your presence. Everybody else, thank you for joining us, and I invite you to come to our next video that should come up briefly. So looking forward to meet you again, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.